everyone.
Hey there, happy Serious Talk Saturday. How's it going, everyone in chat? Thank you for joining us. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us and chatting away already in the chat room as we get started today. Again, those of you who are joining us on twitch.tv/MindMineTV. But if you're joining us via podcast, whether it be iTunes, Google Play, Podbean, or many other aggregators, thank you so very much for joining us today and putting us in your ears. We greatly appreciate it. And only here will you hear a statement like that. Thank you for putting us in your ears.
That's right.
But no, we greatly appreciate it. And hello to everyone once again. Thank you so very much. Again, this is another Serious Talk Saturday where we take on the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. We cover all different topics and where they intersect and how they impact your life. So everything from arts to entertainment to science, technology, education, you name it. If it's happening in the world, we're going to talk about it and bring about a conversation, at least from our end, from a Western cultural society sort of reference or frame. But again, we do have many people joining us from all over the world in chat, and we also bring up their topics, what they'd like to discuss in chat as well, and their points of views. So we try to really bring a full range of thoughts and ideas behind a specific subject. And today is going to be no different. We have two great topics for you, and especially two of them that we really feel are not only vital and everyday, but really just seem to hit us in one way or another, whether it's us specifically as an individual that gets impacted by these specific topics, or you may know someone. You probably do actually very well know someone who gets impacted by these two topics today.
Indeed, and they're somewhat related and somewhat not. As Evan mentioned, we like to talk about topics that sort of intersect and impact not only us, but also each other.
Yes,
as well. So hopefully everyone's doing well, having a good weekend, and ready to talk about talking. That's right. We're gonna first talk about effective communication. We all know that sometimes it's hard to find the right words to clearly and concisely express yourself to get your message across to somebody else. And when you're faced with conflicting emotions, when you're faced with stress, something like that, you really need to kind of keep those emotions in check in order to continue to have a fruitful conversation going forward, right? And the definition of from Wikipedia of communication, of course, is the act of conveying intended meanings from one entity or group to another through the use of mutually understood signs and semiotic rules. So even in its definition, communication is about coming together, finding common ground, and moving forward. At least that's what I take from it. And improving your communication skills works both in your work, it works both in your, and also in your own personal sphere. Regardless of the type of relationship that you have with the person that you're talking to, the skill set can help you in both arenas. And effective communication, it sounds like it should just be instinctive, right? But all too often when we try to communicate with others, something goes wrong, right? We say one thing, the other person hears something else, and then you're left with misunderstandings, frustration, and even more conflict.
It's like the telephone game.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, someone starts off and says, okay, today is going to be an amazing, fantastic day. And in the end, someone's like, did you hear someone's going to blow up the Capitol building? I mean, that again, that's maybe extreme. I don't know what versions of telephone you guys played whenever you were in elementary school. Mine, it got real.
I was going to say, damn.
But overall, I mean, that's what we're talking about here, is how one thing can then spiral and be conflated or manipulated or twisted, even if it's unintentionally, via how someone else understood it and filtered it and then sent it out along the way.
Exactly. And I think that's literally all of the images, when I was kind of talking about this topic and looking up everything on the internet, all the images were coming up had that sort of telephone game quality to them. Somebody saying something and it got jumbled in the middle of the air and then got to the other person in a completely different manner. So that's definitely apt. And effective communication is actually more than just about exchanging information. It's more than just I say a few words and you hear a few words, right? It's about understanding the emotion and the intentions behind that information. Right. You need to clearly convey a message, but you also need to listen in a way that allows you to fully understand the meaning of what's being said, and at the same time makes the other person feel heard and understood too. So it's kind of like a two-way street. Like, you need to be talking, but you also need to be listening. And of course, we've heard the phrase, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, that you need to listen twice as well as you talk, or as much as you talk.
That's true. Well, and it's hard to communicate too when if you on your end as the listener are not really listening, but planning out what you want to say next. And we kind of have to do that for a balance in a way to keep a conversation going. But to a point, though, you have to be listening, taking it in, actually registering it. You can't be talking about the weather, but you're so excited to talk about the soccer game that you just came back from that you're completely ignoring the other person altogether on what they're saying, just so that you can say, hey, by the way, I made the winning goal at the very end there, da-da-da-da-da-da. And they're like, wait, what? Hello, left field.
And effective communication also pertains whether you're talking to a complete stranger, right? Somebody you've just met, or your best buddy from like 30 years ago. And to note here that just because you are talking to your best friend or somebody you've known for years and decades, don't forget that they too still have feelings. You can't always expect them to be there for you and to like understand what you mean. Just because they've known you for a long time doesn't mean that they have to keep putting up with your terrible communication skills. And in some ways, I think it's even more important to be kind and understanding of your closest friends, your significant other, your family, because these old ties sort of have a way of blinding you, I think, to all the shit that you maybe are putting them through, because you tell yourself, oh, they know me, they know I'm joking, they know what I really mean, and that might not necessarily be the case, right? And I think it's also important to keep in mind, what is the goal of your conversation, of your communication with the other person right now, right? Is it to piss them off? Is it to make them understand something and agree with you? Do you want them to do you want to get them to do something? Is it to find common ground? Basically, is it to further the relationship or whatever type of relationship it is, or is it to break it? And I think it's really important, regardless of your communication skills per se, whether you're working to improve them, whether you're the best orator in the country, you have to think about what are your long-term goals with this person that you're talking to, that you're communicating with, or the group of people that you're communicating with, right? What do you hope to accomplish? And then you really have to look at how you're communicating and try to change that to effectively get the results that you want. And I know some people might say that, oh, that sounds like manipulating. And in a way it is. But again, I think manipulation gets such a bad rap as a word. But you can, if you see somebody's in trouble and you're trying to help them, right? Manipulating them to tell you what's going on so that they can seek help so that you can help them. That's not a bad thing, So really think about what it is that you're trying to get out of the conversation, I think. And, just kind of overall, and we'll go into a little bit more detail here, but just kind of overall basics, try not to attack, try not to use negative language. And most important, don't ignore what the other person is both saying and what they're feeling, right? Because at our core, I think everybody has, we all have good intentions at heart, right? We're all doing the best with what we have, with where we are, and give the other person a chance to also explain what's happening on their end before you jump down their throat, right? Because it's somehow very easy for us, I think, to get into that mentality of, well, that person is out to get me. They're doing that because like they want to hurt me or something like that, or that person doesn't care about me. I have to make them care about me. When the truth is probably closer to the fact that we're all to some extent selfish. We mostly think about ourselves. We live in our own bubble. Certainly in our minds, that's sort of been shaped by our past experiences, our past communication with others. And so, to summarize, they're a person just like you. They want to be loved, they want to belong, they want to feel important and worthy, and they want to be heard in that communication as well, in that conversation.
Well, and you mentioned another word, too, that I think gets a bit of a bad rap. And has a lot of heavy negative attached to it, but there are some positives, and that's actually being selfish in a way.
Yes.
Again, we have to keep in mind that we still have the hunter-gatherer mentality. We still bring a lot of that baggage from our ancestors into this world today. And when we say selfish, again, a lot of times it's innate just because the fact of survival. We had to think about ourselves first. We had to put the mask on ourselves first to breathe, if you will, like, to use that airplane terminology. Whenever there is an issue or turbulence, make sure you put the mask on yourself first, so that way you can then go and help others. And so in this sense, of course, in a survival type of mentality, you're going to think about yourself more naturally than someone else, typically, again, unless something occurs where, you rip the mask off to put it on someone else because their mask isn't working. There are moments like that too. So, again, there is selfishness in a way that is not the most horrible thing in the world, as many make it out to be, as we see in films and books and everything like that. There's also just that kind of natural, innate survival instinct. And because we're not being chased, well, many of us, again, depending on the country you're in and everything else, are not being chased by lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, our body still naturally reacts in that way. And so it has to figure out, or we as an individual have to figure out and differentiate between, okay, is this survival instinct really necessary? Do I really need to focus on myself right now? Or do I need to pull it back a little bit? So I want to also mention that too, for when it comes to communication, don't feel horrible if, you have a hard time focusing because you just are excited to tell someone something, right? Or you feel like there's something important that you feel they need to know because they can benefit from it. But it's all about context too, and timing. Understanding that, okay, well, they're trying to tell me something. Let them be important for this moment because this isn't life or death information. I can hold on to this for a bit, let them finish, and then transition instead of, again, just kind of like word vomiting in their general direction and having them have to pick up the pieces and everything, clean up the mess. You know what I mean? So I do want to hit on that, at least in the sense of like selfishness, and where I think some of it comes from. It's just this natural instinct. So it is difficult to drop the whole like, oh, well, I want to really tell you something. Or I need to say something, or what have you, or like, I haven't been able to talk to anyone in days, and I really need to get this off my chest sort of situation, right? Because that can even amplify that kind of anxiety and survival instinct in a way, that fight or flight. So, there is something to think about when it comes to that. I just want to bring that up as well when it comes to your communication. Don't feel bad when we say selfish or anything like that. It's not that sort of intent.
That's a good point to bring up, exactly. And we have some, of course, great comments in chat. Denise the Grease and Trunk both talking about texting, for example, right? That communication, the intent of the communication can sometimes get lost, right? There's a lack of tone of voice, facial expression. Texting in itself is difficult. So if you're going to have a conversation, you want to have a conversation that leads somewhere. And it's been difficult to get to there with this person. Don't do it through text. Don't do it through, don't give them a call. Try to have some sort of face-to-face interaction, or at the very best, some sort of a Google Hangouts, a Skype, something where you can also have some of the verbal cues there that can help you along. Because as we'll talk about, verbal language is also something that's important in effective communication too.
Well, and I will say, though, depending on the situation you're in, sometimes it's not a bad thing to start with text or a written language, as long as you realize what you're saying and how you're saying it, and you read over it before you send it, instead of letting the emotions take over. But actually, let it, if it helps you, type it out first. In that way too, you can reread it and go, okay, I don't need to send this. Maybe I'm just maybe I'm overthinking it. You could also look at it and go, okay, I'm going to send it, but I know the intent behind it. I can read it. I'm seeing that it doesn't seem direct or offensive, but then I'm also going to back it up and say, and if you want to talk more about this, I'm willing to talk. Let's actually talk this out. Because sometimes it is important too to also gauge the other person's response. Sometimes it's important just to kind of let it out before you let them know about it. So typing it out and seeing it in front of you can actually help you process it a little bit better. But again, it's all contextual. It's all based on the situation or the context that you're dealing with and who you're speaking with too.
Exactly. And that's a good point too. I think a lot of the effective communication that we're told to do, or how, the skills to implement for effective communication tends to be, oh, you're talking one-on-one with somebody that you're potentially having a conflict with, right? But the skill set also works if you're talking to a group of people, right? Because you still want to come across as clearly and as concisely as possible so that you get the right message across, so they do understand what you're trying to say. And, a few things that are kind of stopping all of us from communicating effectively include, as Evin mentioned, emotions, right? The stress, the out of control emotions. If you're stressed, if you're feeling emotionally overwhelmed, you yourself are more likely to actually misread the other people. You're likely to send sort of confusing, maybe off-putting nonverbal signals. And you can also just lapse into a tried and true behavior that you've been lapsing into before, right? And you do need to sort of learn to hopefully quickly kind of calm your emotions down and try to be as objective as possible in your communication with the other person. Another thing that tends to stop us from communicating effectively is a lack of focus, right? If you start a sentence and then you trail off and you start talking about something else, and or you're multitasking, you're checking your phone, you're planning about what you're going to say next, but haven't said anything yet. You have to avoid distractions. You need to stay focused on what you're about to say. Another thing is inconsistent body language, right? So your nonverbal communication should not only be appropriate, but hopefully should reinforce what is being said, not contradict it. It's kind of the one example that I hear a lot is, you say yes, but you're shaking your head no, or you say yes, but you're looking down at your feet, right? So you're not really saying yes at that point, right? So make sure that your nonverbal communication matches your verbal communication as best as possible. And it can take practice. All of this can, right? Because strangely enough, I don't think any of us are innately born with great communication skills, right? Because, as we mentioned before, some groups may communicate differently than others, right? In some families, there's not a lot of talking. So you have to navigate that communication a little differently. In some families, there's a lot of talking, right? So then you have to navigate that communication very differently.
I have one of those families. Holy shit. Do I ever have one of those families? You go there for a holiday, and it is, again, I do love my family. Don't get me wrong. This is nothing like terribly negative by any means or anything like that, but just like, they know how to talk, and they will talk. And you will leave a room and you will go into a closet and go, oh my God, that's what silence sounds like. Wow, that's amazing. Again, different families, different strokes for different folks.
And back in Romania, the culture that I grew up in, at least the one that I perceived to be, it was very much you didn't talk. You didn't talk about your problems. You kind of dealt with them yourself. And it was ironic because they did like to get together and talk, but it never really felt like anybody was talking about anything meaningful. Again, I was little, so, maybe they just didn't talk about meaningful things when they were around me. But it always felt like we were kind of skimming the surface and everybody was okay. And nobody wanted to just talk about what actually is happening.
They just want to kind of keep on swimming.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. They were looking for something.
And I know, actually, I think we have this further down, but I know that Trunk mentions, do you have any pointers as to how to become best aware of your own body language, subliminal cues? I don't know if we want to hit that now or want to hold on to that and some of the other things that have been mentioned in chat thus far.
Yes, we can definitely talk. I don't think we specifically necessarily talk a lot about how to be aware of your bodily cues, your nonverbal cues, I should say. I also think that is something that is cultural to some degree, right? Like,
yes,
there's certain mannerisms or actions or gestures that in some countries or in some cultures mean one thing, but in others mean a different thing, or don't mean anything at all. So you think that you might be communicating something when that's not necessarily true. Now, there's obviously some some of the negative body language, right? For example, crossing your arms, typically avoiding eye contact, though I do know in some cultures that's actually, you are supposed to avoid eye contact, because if you look at them directly, they might think of that as an aggressor, or like an aggression.
Or that you're trying to or that you're sexually attracted to them and trying to actually engage in something. This is actually very well known in the Middle East, especially to women who are dressed with the hijab and everything on to cover their bodies. This actually happened to me, so to kind of go off this with an example, we were actually, a group of us from my university went to Egypt to study history, Arabic, and some other things there. And we were walking down and we saw this elderly gentleman, probably in his 70s, I would say, or so. At least that's what he looked like, but hard to say nowadays. But he was with his wife, who was way younger than him, but was dressed up, all covered and everything like that, very traditional. And again, she's not there to be looked at. It's kind of like property in a way. It's his, so you don't look at it, you don't touch it, you don't talk to her or anything like that. And I had just looked up, and because this was my first time at that point in my life where I had really seen, someone dressed like that in person. And of course, all you see is black, and then you see eyes. And so my eyes naturally went up to hers. And the guy got so frustrated, started yelling at me, shaking his cane at me and everything else. And just got so angry that we had to cross the street just to get away from him. We had to go out of our way just to get around and go there. But again, there was no way of me communicating to him, hey, I did not mean anything by it, because I wasn't comfortable in the language enough. And he was so frustrated that I knew that no matter what I said, it wouldn't matter to him, because he also saw the fact that, oh, it's some American or some, white dude coming in here. And so there's a little bit of that kind of bias too that comes in. And so, it was very hard to try to communicate anything. So we just kind of, separated, walked away, trying to show at least in some form that we weren't trying to do anything, trying to start anything. But yeah, just even simple eye contact there in that specific situation actually made things worse. So it is very, very cultural. Another thing is that, where many people cross the street, and if they see traffic coming, they'll kind of put their hand out, just like, hey, whoa, I'm here. Whereas in the Middle East, again, at least specifically in Egypt, that's actually like basically flipping them off. That's just a sign of extreme rudeness. You don't want to do it. And so they said, hey, don't do that if you have to. And they showed us another, basically kind of, what do I want to say? Like physical action to take to show, hey, whoa, I'm here. But don't do what we're used to doing, like, say, in the U.S., where you're running across the street in New York or Chicago, you put your hand out at a taxi cab to be like, hey, whoa, 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 slow down. Don't do that there. So, yeah, it is very difficult based on a cultural lens on what is really best for your physicality and how do you best portray yourself when communicating with someone, because it can vary drastically.
Yeah, and that would also, I think, translate, no pun intended, into how you speak in a different place where they have a different language. Because even if you're translating something, you're trying to translate it literally from your own language, it might not translate well on the other one, right? Like slang or certain other things that you might be familiar with, and vice versa. If they're talking about something that you might say, I don't really understand the meaning of that, even though you clearly understand the words, you may not understand the meaning of it. So there's certainly certain obstacles and challenges that exist when you're talking about different cultures, different countries as well. So, you know, if you are traveling or you are communicating with people that aren't from sort of your immediate vicinity or something that you are used to, it would definitely behoove you to do a little bit of research and see and make sure that you're as well informed as you can be before interacting in such a particular circumstance as well. But I do think that if your intent and your meaning is coming from a good place, right? Hopefully the person that you're speaking with or the person that you're finding in that situation will also understand, right? Because it's not like you're saying one thing and that's it. That's the end of the conversation, right? It is supposed to be a conversation. It is supposed to be a two-way exchange of information, as it were. So hopefully the person that you're dealing with will also understand, hey, this person isn't from here. Let me try to communicate with them and try to find that middle ground that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, at least from a U.S. perspective, when it comes to body language, you know, sometimes take a moment to feel like, where's your tension being held? And this is actually an exercise that many actors do too, to be more self-aware of your body, especially when you're on stage, because you want to assume the role of the character. But if, say, for instance, you're super tensed up, your shoulders maybe are more perked up because of all the tension, maybe you are, let's say your fists are clenched from stress or tension as well, and you don't realize that you're clenching your fists, but your character is supposed to be happy and ecstatic to see someone, that's not going to read, right? What we're hearing from you verbally in comparison to what we're seeing physically is very, very different. So sometimes just taking in and analyzing your body, like how you normally would stand. Even if you want to do it in front of a mirror, just out of curiosity, just to kind of experiment and try it out, and just look at yourself and go, where do I hold the points of tension in my body? How that read if, you know, I have my shoulders kind of hunched up and my fists clenched, or if they're just relaxed. How do I come off with my eyes looking straight into your eyes, or into my own if I'm looking at a mirror, with my chin up and everything, in comparison to if I'm looking down, maybe toward the sink or toward the ground to my feet. You know, and I do this with actors too when I'm teaching them on characterization. I say, okay, walk around the room a bit. So find an open space, walk around the room, just as yourself. Just relax. Don't think about anything. Just, you know, if anything, focusing on your breath. Okay, now what I want you to do is walk through the space, but this time I want you to lead with your chest. So throw that chest of yours out, okay? This is gonna be the biggest and boldest thing on your body right now. And if you were to cross a finish line in a race, your chest pretty much would be the first thing that crosses that finish line. So now walk around the space like that, okay? Now I give them a little bit of time, and then I let them kind of think on it and simmer on, you know, how has my body changed while moving through the space? And then I have them analyze and go, well, what was different between that and between you just walking as yourself? What felt different? Where were the points of tension? Where were the points of stress on your body? How did it make you feel psychologically? A lot of times how we move through a space actually does impact our emotional status. So we do feel differently. You will feel differently leading with your chest through a location in comparison to if you're leading with your forehead, or you're leading with your toes on your feet, or if you're leading with your pelvis. Again, that really changes how you feel, how you move around the space, how you interact with the space, and how other people view you. And so especially when I have other students, sometimes I'll pull students aside and say, okay, you stand here, watch them as they lead with their pelvis, or with their stomach, or with their chin, or with their forehead. And then I let the actor describe how they felt, but then I'll have the actors on the side let them know what actually came across, because communication is so vital as an actor, especially as you're the ones who are supposed to be manipulating said communication to get a point across, because you're in on that communication way before technically that communication or that story happens when it's on stage or in front of a camera. So you have to know Is this character being manipulative maliciously, or are they just not realizing what they're doing? And then you have to bring that into a performance. And so sometimes doing that just as an everyday person can be really important. If you're coming across a lot of conversations out in the open where they get really awkward, or you're not sure why they're not really carrying on like you're hoping to, sometimes it's important to do some of those exercises just to get a sense of how are you portraying yourself. Because if you're in the US, when you cross your arms, you're closing yourself off. Now, for me, it's actually more of a comfort thing. I feel a bit more comfortable just because I am slightly insecure for the most part. But also the fact is that for me, it's like, because I have such a long back, I'm tall, this actually is kind of nice to adjust my back. But again, just because it feels comfortable, I'm actually feeling comfortable, but the person I'm talking to may not, because I may come off as more intimidating. Especially when you take in the fact I am 6'4", I have a very deep voice, I'm probably looking down on this person, and I have my arms crossed.
You just look like a bouncer at that point. I'm like, what did I do? Oh my God, he's gonna beat me up.
Yeah, so it's like, sometimes you have to think about your presence as well. So it's not even just, how you're holding yourself, but just who you are naturally, More people get intimidated by a taller male than not, for example, especially if you're a woman on an elevator and you're maybe like Tatiana's height, so about 5'1" or so, and you all of a sudden have this really tall guy with a big booming voice come in with his arms crossed, but because he's 6'4", you got to look up everything else, that becomes intimidating. I've seen it actually with conversations where Tatiana and I will go to events, and I won't even have my arms crossed. I'll have them down, and I'll be engaged, and I'll be making eye contact and trying to be friendly with them. But more people feel comfortable talking to Tatiana. One, because again, not a tall figure that they have to look up to, but also because sometimes that can be a little intimidating. And so they'll naturally just start answering one of my questions, but by making eye contact to Tatiana.
Oh yeah, that is the weirdest thing. Like, we'll just be standing next to each other. You're conversing with them. I'm not even paying attention. I'm like looking at something else. Something is going on. And then I'll look over and the person responding to Evin is actually looking at me, talking to me. And I'm like, I don't even know what are we talking about? What's going on? Like,
yeah,
it's so bizarre.
Yeah, sometimes it's just, again, what you're kind of born with too. So you have to keep that in mind. It sucks in a way, but again, you have to think about, well, how would I feel in their position too? Not knowing the situation, not knowing the person. So yeah, I would say think about what you're working with. So think about your body as a toolkit. You have many different tools in that toolkit. You can do many different things with it. So just know what you've got in that toolkit, and then know, again, some of the little things that you do with how you hold yourself, how you converse, and also, are you, again, listening to someone too? Because it may not even be your body language. Maybe the fact that this person just feels they're not listening to me. As I'm saying one thing, they're telling me about something else. I know, for instance, I know people that have ADD and they don't mean to, but it's really tough sometimes to have a discussion with them because of the fact that, you have them so distracted at times. Like they'll be talking to you and all of a sudden like, oh, look, a pigeon. And you're just like, yeah, that's a pigeon, but we're talking about something serious here. And again, it's not their fault. That's just, again, the chemistry and what they're working with. So, we have to keep just a lot of different things in mind when we communicate. And sometimes we have to understand the situation and just not let it, hit you personally by any means. But again, when it comes to the physical, though, and nothing to do with direct verbal communication or, obstacles that you face, such as, that concept like ADD or ADHD or anything like that. Just be aware of how you hold yourself. Be aware of distance, what's acceptable within that culture. I know Denise also mentioned in chat too about just doing your research. If you go to another country, for example, even in the US, there are some, pretty clear distinctions with the North and the South. There are certain things, certain ways you hold your body, certain ways of communicating in the North that would not fly in the South, and vice versa. And also in a way on the East Coast in comparison to the West Coast. So it's just doing your research, understanding a little bit more about it before just jumping in. It's great that you want to, if you are the type that wants to explore, meet new people, experience new cultures, but just know the basis of those cultures before jumping into it. That's one of the really big core things. If you're in your own neighborhood, though, again, just be aware of how you hold yourself. Be aware of how you communicate. If it does help too, I mean, feel free to record yourself. You know, just talk with a friend on the phone or something like that. Or if you're in a room with someone, just hit record. Don't record them, but you can record yourself though. Just review it back. And I know it seems kind of extreme to some people who aren't in the entertainment business, focused in on their acting and what they do and everything, like, you know, how they present themselves. But if you are really concerned about that, you notice there is a trend, or you feel like there's always awkward social interactions happening, try it, test it then. If it's something that really bothers you, you know, take the initiative to do something about it. Try something new. You'd be surprised at how much it can actually potentially help you.
Yeah, and I would say that's the same also for voice. What I come across is I talk to people and I feel like they don't take me seriously because I tend to come off kind of peppy, happy, and sort of young, right? And so I'll tell them something that's important and I know that it is right, and they look at me like, oh, she doesn't know anything, and I can see it in their face. So then I'll try to like deepen my voice a little bit and try to say a little less uhs and ums, which is difficult. It's hard for me. And it's a skill that I have to practice. And I remember actually when I was playing The Sims, to get up the skill of, I don't remember what it's called, something like communication related. They actually go in front of the mirror to practice it. And when I was younger, I was like, that's weird. Why would you practice in front of the mirror? But just as Evan said, that's perfect because you get to see yourself. You get to get real-time feedback of yourself to yourself. And it can really help, regardless of whatever industry you're in, regardless if you're in the workforce, if you're a student, if you're hanging out at home, if you're just trying to have a conversation with someone. It is so important to realize, how do you come across? Because if I see somebody who's sort of frowning, there's a lot of things that could be happening. They could be lost in thought. They could be upset about something. They could be thinking about something, and that's just their thinking face, right? But back in the day when I wasn't really fully aware of this, I would just think that they were pissed off because all of the people that I had really come across before when they were frowning at me was because they were pissed off, right? Or they were upset about something. So it's important to also keep your own biases in check as well, especially when you are in a different place, but also even when you are dealing with someone that you've dealt with for a long time, like people that you know, people that are close to you, because again, it can feel sort of easy to just get complacent and think that, oh, I know what this person is going through, but also realize that people also change over time, right? Just because you've known someone for 30 years doesn't mean that they were the same person they were 30 years ago, just like you yourself are probably not the same person you were 30 years ago. So it's also important to really be engaged, which brings me to my first effective communication skill, numero uno. Become an engaged listener, right? So understand not only the words, but the emotions behind what the other person is saying. Make the other person feel heard and understood. Essentially, take the focus off of you for a little bit and focus fully on the person that is speaking. Whether or not you think that you've known them for a long time, whether or not they're a stranger, whether or not you're trying to get them to do something, give them 100% of your attention. And avoid interrupting them or trying to redirect the conversation for your concerns. You know, don't say something like, oh, well, if you think that's bad, let me tell you what happened to me, right? Or think that you know where their conversation is going. And I have a terrible habit of interrupting other people because I feel like they're going to start, especially if I know them, I hear them, they start talking and I'm like, oh, I know how this is going to end. Let me just like help you get you to the end right away, right? And I forget that it's important to, one, just let that person speak. Like, why, you know, my voice is no more important than theirs. And just because I think I know what they're gonna say doesn't mean that is what they're gonna say. It doesn't matter if we've had the conversation 100 times before. It might end differently this time, right? And again, and I can't stress this enough, listening is not the same thing as waiting for your turn to talk. It can feel like that, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Because you can't fully concentrate on what the other person is saying if you're concentrating on what you're going to say next, or you're holding in your head, oh, I really want to talk about this, right? So, and also, if the other person is good at reading signals, they can tell that you're not listening to them, right? Like they know that your mind's somewhere else because you probably have a tell. So show your interest in what's being said as well. So you can listen, but typically, and certainly in the Western culture, it's nice to know that the other person is aware that you're talking and still engaged, right? So you nod occasionally if that's what makes sense for that situation. Smile at the person. Again, make sure that your posture is open, inviting. A lot of times you can lean forward to show interest that you're still listening to them. Feel free to, if there's a break in the conversation, you can summarize back a little bit of what they said to you to make sure that you understood what they said. So it's important to, again, have that two-way communication. Just because you are listening doesn't mean that you have to stop conversing, if that makes sense. And try to set aside judgment. You don't have to like the other person, or you don't have to agree with their ideas or their values or their opinions. But if you are, again, trying to have a conversation with someone and you're trying to be an effective communicator and you are working toward a goal of moving forward in some manner with that person, you have to set aside your judgment. You gotta, withhold the blame and the criticism. You need to understand where they're coming from and you need to hear them. And the most difficult communication, when it is successfully executed, can actually lead to an unlikely communication with that person, right? You might actually find common ground with someone that you thought, no, this person is so different from me. They don't understand what I'm trying to say. I'm not even opening up my mind to them. But if you stop and you really listen to them, you might find that you have something in common and be able to move forward from that commonality. And the last thing in this particular skill set is, in this becoming an engaged listener, is provide feedback. So you are listening, and especially if you feel like there might be a disconnect or you want to make sure you are on the same page, paraphrase again back what they said, summarize it. Hey, what I'm hearing is this. It sounds to me like you're saying this. Is that correct? Right? And don't like just repeat back what they said. If they say one sentence, don't repeat that sentence back. You want to show that you actually understood what they said. So put that in your own words. And again, you're conversing, right? So you're trying to say, hey, I listen. I heard what you said. This is what I think you said. Is this what I said? And look, this is how I communicate back to you. And ask questions, clarify points, right? What do you mean when you say that? Or, hey, is this what you mean when you say this other thing?
Mm-hmm. Well, in everything that we're saying here too is especially important for leaders. So for those who are in a business, running an organization, or anything along those lines, and you're working with a group of people, it's so important that you exude as many of these as possible and try to incorporate as many effective communication styles and ways of communicating as possible. And the reason why I also bring this up too is because Trunk makes a really interesting point in chat. He says, what I found is helpful if people want to talk about different stuff at once, it helps to have a whiteboard or something in the room so they can jot down their topic. Then we go through them in chronological order on the board. That way listening gets easier for all and tension eases because they do not feel silenced by others talking. And again, that's a great point to make because some people feel more comfortable, as we mentioned, talking than others do. Some would rather listen. Some aren't sure what to say or how to phrase certain things. And, maybe it's the concern of looking stupid. Maybe it's the concern of them feeling like they'll slow down the meeting or the conversation as a whole. And so they're trying to avoid that, or they're hoping that, again, someone else just brings it up, or maybe it's just them and it's stupid to bring up what their concern is or their topic that they would like to discuss. So overall, a leader has to make sure when they're put in that position to take the reins of that and to find ways such as what Trunk mentioned there to make sure that everyone feels like they are included in that conversation, and that, certain things that are important will be discussed. If they're not important for that, very specific time period, maybe you only have 50 minutes or something to discuss everything, then everyone has to leave and go their separate ways, then yeah, of course, certain things won't be able to be discussed at that current point. But then it's up to you as a leader to say, but that doesn't make it any less important. It's just a different focus for today's conversation. Let's touch base on that outside of this. If you want, let's meet up after this. We'll discuss more and see how we can bring it up maybe in the next meeting, or set up something else so that way we can then all come together and really hone in and focus in on that specific subject matter. But it's all about how you take it in. It's all about how you present it, and it's all about how you manage it. It's about good management of communication too. So in the end, as a leader, you got to understand those facets in order to have a successful project happen, or production, or whatever you're working on. And that's one of the best ways of making everyone feel included and feel like they really understand the process, and that they can leave there after you've had this conversation feeling confident and feeling like they can take on everything that they need to, that everything is well done and established for them, and that they can easily open up communication later on down the road to you and to the others of the group.
Those are very good points. I will say that if you do have somebody who is easily distracted or potentially tired or overwhelmed by something that has nothing to do with you or the situation that you're presently in, it can be difficult to get them engaged, right? And so one thing that I found that really helps, and this is from my resident advisor training, thank you, university, is if you see that someone's not into what's happening, especially if you are part of a group, feel free to not necessarily call them out on it unless you have a good rapport with that person and you think that they'll be okay being essentially called out in the middle of a group situation. But you can take a break, and go talk to that person and just ask them, hey, I see that, I know that you want to be here and move this forward, but it seems like you're maybe thinking about something else, maybe you're concerned with something else. Did you want to talk about it real quick? Did you want to kind of get that off your chest, if you will? Or, again, if you don't want to call them out, take a break and just have everyone talk about their day, or maybe talk about what they're feeling, and just give that person a chance, if they want to, say what's on their mind, or think about it in for a few minutes by themselves when they're not having to pay attention to something else that you are wanting them to do. Because the hardest thing, too, to moving forward in communicating with somebody is if they are not present mentally, because they're worried about something else, it will be very hard for you to have effective communication with them, because they're not there. They're not effectively communicating back to you. So again, part of being an engaged listener is to make sure that also the environment and the situation that you're putting this other person in is also in a way encouraging encouraging or positive or safe or builds trust for the other person too, I would say. Because there's nothing worse than, okay, you're feeling like you want to talk, the other person is not, right? It's, sort of some of the comedy sketches that we see, certainly in the US, is, oh, honey, we have to talk. And it's like, oh my God, we have to talk, right? And you're like catching the other person unawares. So again, establishing that safety, that trust, and showing that you actually care about talking with them. So you are caring about what they're going through as well. Mm-hmm. I would say. So our next skill for effective communication is, as we spoke before, paying attention to non-verbal signals, which can be difficult if you are not face-to-face or present in some visual form with the other person. And it can also be difficult if they're from different countries or different cultures, right? So it's important that you get better at reading those nonverbal communication and also how you deliver your nonverbal communication. So be aware of those individual differences. And it's not only different cultures in different countries, but also age, religion, gender, and the emotional state of the other person. You need to take all of that into account, because, an American teen a grieving widow, they are all going to use nonverbal signals differently. And yeah, that will take practice, and that doesn't necessarily come naturally. And, you know, we're not all going to be 100% correct all of the time. And nonverbal skills, that's, again, just one part of the whole effective communication bundle, right? It's another tool in your toolkit that you can use.
Yeah, and I would also, to add on to that, again, going back to those actor exercises, people watch. If you're really intrigued by how people communicate and what works for nonverbal communication, what doesn't, what seems to arise in certain situations and conversations, people watch. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, right? That's the reason for public spaces, is to look around, take in your surroundings, right? So go to a mall, go to a park, go around a store, and just as you're looking around, just notice the people around you. And again, this also helps with that whole sense of awareness in general and in the space around you, this kind of mindfulness that we all hear about. And that can be very, very important. So it's actually kind of multifaceted in a way. You get to learn and take in your surroundings and learn more about these cues, about these nonverbal cues and this kind of nonverbal communication. But also you get a sense of just the space around you, and you can focus a little bit more on the here and now rather than like the 100 other things you have to do once you leave that location, or the 5 things that really sucked, you know, an hour or two ago. But overall, though, it is a great way. And I tell actors, I tell directors, I tell people who have to work with verbal and nonverbal communication, just go out. You're surrounded by influence. You are surrounded by examples and samples of what you're hoping to find. Utilize it. Utilize the resources to which you have. So feel free to look around and see. You can also, I would say, watch a film, watch a play. Yes, even a play. Yeah, that still happens, right? Theater's still a thing, folks. Make sure to check those out, though. Yes, they are a lot of times a hyper realistic version of what we have to do a lot of times, because we have to try to sell it, especially in theater, right? You have to be bigger than average because you're trying to get the people who are in the 400th row in the back to see you and to understand what you're trying to express, right? So it is a little bit bigger, but sometimes you can actually learn from that, because you can look at it and go, oh, wow, yeah, I do see it now that it is amplified. And if I shrink it down and shrink that gesture down, I have seen that a lot. My mother does it. My father does that gesture. I do that whenever I'm in a discussion. I get lost in thought. Oh, okay, that clicks now. That makes a little bit more sense, because these things are meant to be a mirror to society, to you people there, to feel a connection to. And so it humanizes it, right? So these are things that humanize those stories. So there's a reason why it's being used. So, you can study it from there too, but again, take it with a grain of salt, as once again, they're meant to be amplified. They're meant to be controlled to help further the story along, more so than anything else. But otherwise, get out there, explore a little bit. Even if you get anxiety or anything like that from being out in crowds, find a place where you feel like you have a little bit of control, while still being in an area at the same time where there are plenty of people that you can just kind of view and take in and just understand a little bit better on communication. But that's probably one of the best ways of learning it and understanding what are these nonverbal cues? What are people doing to communicate? How do I read them too, especially? That's another way of thinking of it too, is myself as an individual, based on my experiences, my cultural lens. When I see this, what do I think the story is? What do I think the situation is that's going on here? Because you might be surprised, because you might actually come across something that's completely different from the actual situation. Maybe you're like, oh, this person's really upset at this person. But then all of a sudden you find out that the person's like discussing a sports game or something they watched and how passionate they are about it. So all of a sudden we were confusing passion for aggression. And that's something to think about, as well as the whole idea that, again, there are certain gestures and certain things we do non-verbally that we automatically assume and jump to, oh, this means anger, or this means this, or this means that, when there are actual multiple emotions that can actually tie in to just one single non-verbal expression. And it's really important then at that point to understand the context. And then we're coming back to that idea of context. What is actually going on in this conversation? What is the point of it? What are they trying to get across?
Right. It's being present, right? It's being present in the moment and using your experiences in the past, but not relying on them 150%, basically. And this is another good point, too, is that you have to look at nonverbal communication as a whole, right? You can't read too much into a single gesture or a single nonverbal cue, right? Consider all the signals that you're receiving, right? From eye contact to the tone of voice to the body language. Because, anybody can slip up and you're looking away for a second or you're briefly crossing your arms. It may not mean that you're trying to convey a particularly negative emotion. It might just be like, yeah, you had a crick in your neck, and so you did this with your arms or something like that. So just get the whole, like, look at the person as a whole, look at the conversation as a whole, and don't be afraid to, in a way, adapt, right? Like, be in the moment, figure out what's going on, see how the conversation mood changes as you keep talking and that sort of thing. Don't just say, oh, okay, this person is not making eye contact with me, that must mean they're not interested at all. It might be because they're shy. It might be because they noticed something somewhere else. They just got another thought in their head. Feel free to then at that point ask them the question. Hey, are you still listening to me? Is this, I noticed that you're just not looking at me. I was wondering what's going on. I want to make sure that we're having a conversation. Is this a good time still?
Yeah, unless
Something
they punch
like
you in the face.
Okay, yeah.
That's
well,
pretty
if they
direct.
punch you in the face,
Nonverbal communication.
That is, yes.
There's no, like, sitting there while your nose is bleeding going, I wonder if they actually meant that. Maybe they were just really happy to see me. And their hand especially, the 5 fingers on that hand were just so excited to see my nose.
Oh, dear.
So there are certain things that you just can't confuse. But most of the time, it's so easy to confuse or to inflate a situation larger than what it was or an expression larger than what it was meant to be. And then all of a sudden, it all kind of spirals out of control from there.
And that's actually a good point to bring up. I know it's not that we're going to delve too much into this topic. However, I do want to mention that the same way that you can misread a person's actual verbal cues, you can also sort of disillusion yourself into thinking that there is more there than what they even said, right? So it's very important to clarify and not create this image of this person and this person's emotions perhaps towards you in a positive or a negative way, right? Like, you really have to be in the moment. Like, you can't, just because somebody smiled at you and did something nice for you doesn't mean they want to, like, get it on with you in the bedroom, they might just be a nice person. So it's very important to, again, be present in the moment and don't let your imagination run away with you in either direction. Basically.
Yeah, when I think some of that comes from, again, when we talked about the idea of instinct, having that hunter-gatherer mentality again of survival, we are the worst, but sometimes the best at this whole, like, pre-planning of, like, okay, if something goes wrong, if shit hits the fan, what can I do? And you, like, work out all these different strategies in your head, like it's like you're Tom Cruise or something in Mission Impossible. It's like, okay, so if I get in a bad situation, things get awkward, I'm just gonna, like, flip a switch, a cord's gonna come down, I'm gonna attach it to my waist, and then I'm gonna fly up and, avoid all these laser beams. They're gonna all of a sudden be shot at me, all this crazy shit that potentially could happen, right? But at the same time, though, I mean, so it can be a positive, but it can also be a clear negative. So being in that moment is so important because, I know I've been in situations where, maybe I didn't agree with someone. And I'm usually the one that does want to talk it out. And the other person gets super pissed. And so all of a sudden they're like, hey, I want to talk. And you're like, oh, shit. Like, all right, because Because you start
going down for real.
Right, because you're like, this person never wants to talk. They always just huff and puff and then walk away or stomp away. So what do they want now? Do they really want to discuss? No, I feel like they're just going to attack me, and I don't want to sit here for 15 minutes and get verbally assaulted, right? So of course I'm going to be planning in my head like, okay, well, if this happens and if they say this, I'm going to say that and da-da-da. And all of a sudden they're just like, hey, I'm sorry, I was an asshole. Or whatever it may be, right? And so it's just like that whole time you're like, oh, whew, well, I'm relieved. I made that way worse than what it was going to be. Great. So here you are stressing yourself out for maybe days on end thinking, oh boy, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And then it's like, oh, nothing. Okay, cool. That's great. You know, and it works out. They want to actually discuss with you. And most of the time, too, if someone wants to kick your ass, honestly, they're just going to go and do it. They're not going to tell you. They're not going to be like, hey, 5 o'clock tomorrow, I'm going to knock on your door and kick your ass. So, you know, it's not like things potentially will progress to violence or to something truly terrible. A lot of times it's just a discussion. We can't amplify it any more than just that. It's just words. You know, and actually George Carlin has great skits talking about language and how words are just words. You're the ones putting the emphasis on them, so just chill out about it. You know, it's like words are not, you know, naturally horrible things. They're just sounds that come out of our mouth thanks to vibrations of vocal cords. Like, you know, it just happens. It's how you take them that make them good or bad. It's your basically absorption of it and then projection out onto the world. That is where it comes from for a word to be truly negative or positive, truly a horrible word, or just nonsensical, you know, garbage. And so, you know, you are your filter to the world. So you have to think about that as well. You know, if someone does say something terrible, is it truly terrible? Is it truly hurting you? Is it truly breaking your arms, taking your kids away and, you know, whatever? Like, no, ideally it's just, you could take it as offensive because of your understanding of that word, then fine, you know, move on. And, you know, there's no harm in language itself. So don't let that bring up fear or bring in this fight or flight instinct or, well, I have to be right and they can't prove me wrong. Ideally, we have to go into a conversation, especially if there's a disagreement, going, maybe I am wrong. But I would like to know how I am wrong then. You know, let's see if they can present to me, you know, a discussion that's actually worth it, that proves to me that, hey, you know, maybe I'm not thinking about this entirely on the right point here. Maybe I should reevaluate this. But if you go in going, okay, something goes down, mama said to knock you out, I'm going to knock you out. You can't have that mentality. You can't go in there starting that or making the situation worse. So if you feel like you're doing that, you know, see how you can kind of pull yourself back to help that conversation, because you never know what will happen in the end, you know?
Yeah, we're not saying effective communication is easy by
Hell
any
no.
shake of a stick.
No.
It is difficult. And there's a lot of, putting your ego and your, like, hunter-gatherer instincts just a little bit in check so that you can move forward with this other person or these other people. Which brings me to skill number 3 for effective communication. That's keep stress in check. And the first thing is to recognize when you're becoming stressed, right? Like, your body is pretty good about letting you know if you're stressed, especially as you communicate. The trick here is to listen to it, right? Are your muscles getting tight? Is your stomach tight? Are your hands clenched? Are you forgetting to breathe? Do you feel a little dizzy? Take a moment to just calm down. And stress can be brought on by a lot of different things. It can be related to the conversation you're having. It can be related to the person you're conversing with. It can be related to something that happened 10 minutes before the conversation. It can be related to something that's going to happen after the conversation, right? But just take a moment to calm down and then decide, do you want to continue having this conversation right now, or do you want to postpone it? Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with postponing it. And if somebody's coming at you and says, we need to talk, you can say, hey, listen, I'm not in a good place right now to have a effective communication with you. So can we postpone this to about 3 hours from now, right? Or whatever it might be.
Well, and some people too, I think they want to they want to talk about it right here, right now, a lot of times, either A, they really do care and they just want to make sure that the discussion ends on a good note in some form or fashion. But there are many too, I feel like, just get so scared that if they wait any longer, something bad will happen. And again, we get back to that natural fight or flight instinct situation. We're like, well, no, if we don't handle it now, things are just going to get worse. I'm going to have to keep thinking about it for the next 3 hours, and I'm going to be dreading about the outcome. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Okay, well, let's ask these questions then. Why are you dreading the outcome? Why do you want to really push a conversation when the person just said they can't have the conversation right now because they said they're afraid it will go in that negative that you're worried about 3 hours from now? Like, you really have to think about logic, and sometimes it's hard when emotions get in the way of a conversation or kind of percolate because of a conversation, to actually effectively think. So sometimes giving you that time to think about it is actually a good thing. Whether your body is afraid of facing it or not, it's important sometimes to step away, to have a moment. I know we have in our notes here too, and it's been kind of discussed a little bit, that, if you need time in a conversation, even if you don't want to say, hey, you know what, give me about an hour or two to look at it, sometimes just slowing the conversation down. It feels too high paced for you and you feel like you're losing control. One way of doing it is, again, repeat questions. Go, okay, so wait, what did you mean by that? Or what is the point that you're trying to get across then to me? Or say, hey, so from what I understand, you're saying, and then list the points and go, okay, do I understand that correctly? Is what I'm saying to you what you're trying to tell me? Am I interpreting that correctly? Because not only will it give you more time to think and to hopefully collect yourself, but it will also give you another opportunity to actually truly understand what's being said, and to actually have the other person potentially even reword what they were saying so you can better understand it and maybe go, okay, it's not as bad as I thought.
Exactly. I like that.
So again, taking time is never a bad thing. It depends. I know for me, there are times where it's like, no, I need to just say something right away. But if the conversation doesn't progress after that, that's fine. We can give it time. But there are other times where I'm like, no, I'm going to get back to this in a little bit. I just want time to actually think on it. Because sometimes too, I do understand that, I can be a very emotional person. And so, I can take things personally that probably shouldn't be taken personally. So I know that if I just step away, I can rethink what the person said or how they presented it to me and go, is that what they really meant? And if I am really so concerned about it, let's talk about it. I will say though, not everyone is happy about talking about it. They really aren't. I've lost friendships because of it. And so it's like, well, then they weren't really friendships now, were they? Because to me, friendship means that you have an open line of communication with them and that you're not being malicious or harsh in your language or saying, well, you're a shitty person because you don't talk to me. But then bringing it up and just being honest, being like, hey, I feel kind of left out of things. I feel like I'm not really a friend of yours, or like you're kind of pushing me away as a friend because I don't feel like you're ever, talking to me. Like, what's going on? Am I overlooking something? Am I just not looking at it correctly? Or, is there something going on that maybe I just don't realize? I'd love to hear it so that I can, again, improve as a friend and overall as a communicator. But there are some people that just don't want to deal with that shit. And they just feel like you're poking at them because they know what they said. They know what they did. And a lot of times, they can be guilty of what you want to point out. And they just don't like that being brought up to them. It's a level of insecurity, and that can really hurt friendships too. So not saying that you don't communicate with those people then, but just figure out a way of communicating with them. And if it doesn't work out, don't beat yourself up over it, because a lot of times it's not the communication itself, but that person's insecurity. And so, again, don't just not communicate. Don't just say, I'm not going to worry about it. Communicate it, find out the best way of doing it. If there's a path of resistance there being brought up from the person, it's just best to move on as best as you can. If they say they're your friend, but they don't want to communicate, it's not really, and that's not really a friendship you probably want. Who wants friends that you don't feel you can talk to? At that point, they're just an acquaintance. They're a person you meet in the elevator and say, boy, that weather today.
Right. Or you happen to go to school together. I mean, I know that there's a lot of friendships that I had when I was younger because of, well, proximity, you know, or we took the same classes or something like that. But, and we can probably spend a whole 2 episodes talking about friendships on this show, and shallow friendships, and that's in air quotes. But yeah, it's true. If somebody doesn't want to have a true meaningful conversation with you, and in this, I feel like in our age and time, it is hard because long, meaningful conversations are not something that are encouraged. We have a lot of 140 character type of feelings, emotions, and opinions. And it's hard to fully explain yourself and make yourself understood. And it's hard for other people to fully understand what you're saying and form their own opinions when we live in a society that really encourages short, bite-sized items, right? And it's like we have not evolved to be that great yet. And maybe AI will help. Who knows? Maybe it won't. But having a meaningful conversation with someone and showing that you both respect what they have to say, but also that you respect their time and investment in the relationship that you're trying to work on, that's, you know, that's something that not a whole lot of people have, especially if you want to talk about something that maybe that doesn't put them in a positive light, right?
Right.
Because oftentimes when we have difficult conversations with friends, it's not necessarily to be, wow, you're so amazing, I love you, right? Because then it wouldn't be a difficult conversation. So it's hard to bring up something that, hey, I'm concerned about X, Y, and Z, or, hey, the way you're treating me is bullshit because X, Y, and Z, or something like that. Or I want to be here to help you. Or, hey, we haven't talked in forever. What's going on? Are you still interested in continuing this friendship? And those are hard conversations to have. And it can be difficult when you don't live near each other anymore, when life gets in the way between work or family, other obligations. And again, as I was saying, you know, nobody is the same person they were 30 years ago, right? People change. And if the people that you consider friends don't understand that or don't want to understand that, then yeah, maybe it's time to change the friendships. And I digress. Here we are.
but that really does come to communication, though. And we don't want to just generalize communication, say, well, overall speaking and written and, you know, da-da-da-da-da. Like, we want to actually get into what impacts you as a listener or as a viewer. And so, of course, we come across this daily, right, when it comes to communication with loved ones or communication in the workplace. So we do want to make sure, and it is very important to hit on these specific niches of where we experience communication the most. And so it is very important to bring up those thoughts and ideas, especially as we converse in chat here today via Twitch about this topic, because again, how we relate is based on our own personal experiences, which just so happen to be, you know, our group of friends in comparison to our family, in comparison to our workplace. We have many different tribes in a way. And we are very tribal creatures because we're social beings. And so we have multiple tribes, and a lot of times too, we act differently based on those tribes, and we have very different interactions. So at times too, it's also very important to bring up, well, how would I discuss something with a family member in comparison to how I would discuss something as a leader of an organization, you know, because those can be vastly different, because people also understand the nonverbal communication sort of hierarchy or roles or positions that people hold. And so they view a conversation very differently based on that hierarchy or that positioning of roles, or however you want to break down this person in comparison to this person. So I think it's best also to get on these sort of tangents, if you will, just hitting on the different niches to make sure that people understand that better as well. So
that's a good point. So once you start to have that effective communication, you're talking with this person or this group of people in a safe, trustful environment. They're listening to you, you're listening to them, everybody's engaged. We're all working towards the same goal of hopefully furthering the relationship or the thing further, what's the last skill that's really important? And that's asserting yourself. And that doesn't mean to assert oneself is to really value yourself and your own opinions and know your needs and wants and realize they're just as important as everyone else's, and also learning how to express them without infringing on the rights of others, right? Your needs and wants are no more better than this person's needs and wants. So you have to express negative thoughts in a positive way, right? Like, it's okay to be angry, but you have to be respectful. And receive the constructive feedback as well, positively, right? Accept your compliments graciously, learn from your mistakes, ask for help if you need it. Also learn to say no. Know your limits, and try not to let other people take advantage of you. It's hard for me, I know for sure. But it's very important, and this is something that I'm trying to still learn, is, learn how to say no. It's okay to say no for a variety of reasons. It's okay to explain why. It's okay to not explain why. If the other person respects your boundaries and respects your value, your needs and wants, they will understand that. And if they can't, then again, you have to decide what is the goal of your communication with them at that point. And there's different ways, there's different assertive communication techniques, if you will. There's empathic assertion, right, which kind of conveys the sensitivity to the other person. You recognize that the other person's situation or feelings are valid, but then you state your own needs or your own opinions, right? So for example, hey, I know you've been very busy at work, but I want you to make time for us as well, right? So you're acknowledging, hey, this person is busy, they're overwhelmed, but you want to spend more time with them. Another assertive communication technique is escalating assertion, right? So you can use that when your first attempts maybe aren't very successful. You can essentially become more firm as the time progresses, which may include outlining consequences if your needs aren't met. So not an ultimatum, and don't lead with that, that's for sure. If you don't spend more time with me, I'm leaving you for another person, right? Like, that's not the way to have effective communication. But you can say, if you don't spend time with me, then we don't get to grow together as individuals, and we really aren't together in a union. So what is your goal out of this union? Because part of my goal is to spend time with the person that I'm with, right? Something like that. So there's a lot of different ways you can verbalize it, and it does help to practice beforehand. Certainly, if you want to be clear and concise. But it's also good to practice assertiveness to essentially believe that your needs and wants have value and are important. Because I know for me, that is hard. In the environments that I've grown up in, it was just sort of taken for granted that I would do and agree with everybody else around me because I'm so peppy and happy. And for a long time, my own needs and wants, I didn't even know what they were myself. So it's good to practice that if you have trouble being assertive. And especially if you're about to have a conversation that is difficult. I am conflict averse. I hate having those types of conversations. So it's good to practice beforehand, saying what you want to say, writing them down if you need to, and realize that, as Trunk mentioned in chat, once you have a difficult conversation, that particular relationship, that friendship, that workplace relationship, it can actually feel like you've just leveled up, right? Because if you're talking honestly about where you're coming from, they're listening, and then talking honestly about where they're coming from, and then you're listening, you can come to some common ground, and you can move forward in a positive manner, hopefully.
And we're just kind of catching up on chat too as we go along here. Want to make sure we don't really miss anything. I got some fun discussions, of course, on age overall here, how that communicates to the outside world. We also have a couple different things just about language in general. Let's see here. And also just, again, leaders or bosses, what is that difference? What is that fine line between a leader and a boss, and how they communicate, which is a very good point too. Again, with a leader, they do try to listen. They try to implement ways to make sure most thoughts are heard as best as possible based on the constraints to which you're working in. A boss is just going to tell you how it is and will not listen, And sometimes, again, leaders become bosses. Bosses can become leaders. It depends on the situation. And, I would say for the leaders that sometimes go into boss mode, it's tough. It really is. Because I've been on that end. Tatiana's been on that end. And, it's easy to get stressed. It's easy to get a lot of things, feeling like a lot of things are just stacked up on top of you. And so sometimes you just have to grab the reins and go, okay, look, in order to get things sorted and organized for right now, so I can become a better, more effective leader, I need to grab the reins right now and just say, okay, do this, focus on this, you guys take on this, we're going to take on that, and then we'll all meet up. And sometimes it is important to have those moments of just like, okay, no more discussions for right now. Let's get these core things going for right now. Let's get it organized and structured and see where we go from there. And let's meet up, and then we can really, hopefully, effectively communicate.
And you know what effective communication is really good for? Your mental health, everyone. Your mental health. And it is May, which means it's Mental Health Awareness Month, which is kind of cool. I feel like every month has a thing nowadays. And I wasn't aware about this until I was talking to someone. And Twitch actually has mental health awareness like marketing and things that they're doing too. So kudos to Twitch, because mental health is very important. Your own mental health is really inseparable from your physical health. When somebody talks about I'm healthy, I kind of want to be like, really? How you feeling today? You doing good mentally as well, emotionally? Not just, oh, my cholesterol is low and I've got muscles the size of Texas. And so I think that's really important to talk about it. And I think that there's, and I'm not the only person who thinks this, but I think that there's also a stigma associated with mental health in general, right? And stigma is when someone, or you yourself, who maybe has a mental health condition, views that person or that condition in a negative way because of that mental health condition. And, navigating life with a mental health condition can be tough all by itself, right? The isolation, and then the isolation and the blame and the secrecy that is often encouraged by the stigma can actually create even more challenges to reaching out and getting the needed support and living well. And just to give you some facts, and a lot of these facts are actually from the US only, but mental health affects everyone everywhere in the world. 1 in 5 Americans is affected by a mental health condition. 1 in 5 adults. That's about 43 million people, about almost 20% of the population, experiences some sort of mental illness in a given year. And 7% of adults in the US, about 16 million people, had at least one major depressive episode in the past year. About 18%, so that same 1 in 5 adults in the US, experienced an anxiety disorder like post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, other specific phobias. 1 out of 5. An estimated 26% of homeless adults staying in shelters actually live with a serious mental illness. And an estimated 46% live with a severe mental illness or substance use disorder. Mood disorders, including major depression, bipolar disorder, they're the third most common cause of hospitalization in the U.S. for both youth and adults age 18 to 44. Now, a lot of us here in chat, in our Twitch chat, are around that age range. That's the third most common cause of hospitalization. Now, half of all chronic mental illness begins by age 14 and 3/4 by age 24. And even though there's effective treatment out there, there's long delays, sometimes decades, between the first appearance of symptoms and then when people actually get help. And adults in the US living with serious mental illness actually die on average 25 years earlier than others. And they're treatable medical conditions. So with the right treatments and the right supports, between like 70 to 90% of individuals who have serious mental illness do see a significant reduction of symptoms and improved quality of life if they get the right treatments and supports. And unfortunately, the stigma that we have about mental health and mental health issues for both, men, women, children, seniors, veterans, everyone, it creates this environment of shame and fear and silence, and it actually prevents a lot of people from seeking help and treatment. And this perception of mental illness isn't going to change unless we act to change it.
Oh, yeah. Well, and Fused Fury in chat, too, mentions, I don't know if it's the same over in the U.S., but it's super awkward for people to talk about mental health over here. It's like some sort of taboo, and I have no idea why. And, of course, Fused Fury is in the U.K. I would say that it's becoming easier depending on what part of the U.S. you're in. I think online it's very easy for many people because they hide behind a certain amount of anonymity to talk about mental illness and, obstacles that they face. I personally believe most of this kind of shaming or fear of mental illness is one of two things. One is just kind of a natural fear that, we do see people who have a very hard time controlling the obstacles that they face, the mental obstacles that they face. And sometimes they can act very irrationally, right? And we hear about some horrible stories, or maybe we had a bad experience with someone who was homeless, suffering from a mental illness issue on the streets, right? And so that can happen and bring in a little bit of fear. And we're like, But I think most of it is just because it's not like an open wound on your arm or on your leg. It's not like, you've lost a foot or something, like you can see that. Your brain can visually see it, comprehend it, probably won't like seeing it, but will understand it and understand what's going on there. Like, okay, foot gone, leg bleeding, big pain, boom, understood. Picture comes together, right? But when you say physically, I'm hurting, physically, I feel pain, but it's not visible because you're saying, well, it's internal. People don't understand it. And people hate not understanding things. The brain wants to wrap itself around these ideas or these concepts and go, okay, I understand you. And when it doesn't, it becomes this sort of fear or insecurity and goes, well, I have to know this, otherwise this looks badly on me, because if I can't understand it, then, well, I don't want to be looked at as stupid or crazy myself or da-da-da-da. And so we kind of, people in general, naturally, I think, because of this insecurity, kind of project that onto the people and say, oh, well, you're going through this. Well, this is either bullshit and you're just trying to get attention, or, or let's not talk about that. That's not for polite company. Just because it makes people feel uncomfortable because they don't better understand it. And a lot of people don't try to go out of their way to understand it, at least until it actually impacts them or impacts a loved one, where then they're like, it makes sense now, because you're actually willing to give it the time of day to better understand it. And, this is where I think that stigma comes from, a lot of it. But again, Trunk also mentions too, you look at how mental illness was treated in the past, especially as this kind of almost like disease in a way. And so people didn't want to get next to it, didn't want to, touch a person with mental illness, like there was that stigma there of like something would like all of a sudden transfer almost over to you or something, and you'd lose your faculties or something, right? And we know that that's just not true. But it's sometimes hard when there are enough forces pushing it in your face saying this is how it is. And we still get that in politics today too, a lot of times. When people are trying to get a certain group of votes over another, they try to instill fear. And a lot of times this fear is, if it's not against a person of a different skin color or from a different country, it's because of the obstacles that they face and how, and these people are taking your money and and healthcare that could go toward you is instead going to them. And, you build up all this hatred and stuff for no reason. It's all fear tactics, and it's to help one group feel better than the other, or to help against some sort of insecurity because we just don't see the actual wound. Which is funny because we do. People who suffer from anxiety, people who suffer from depression, we see the signs of that if we really take the time to look at it. If someone has a hard time sitting down, has a hard time focusing, their eyes are dilated, their pupils are dilated, you could probably tell, okay, they're going through a panic attack. They're having an anxiety moment right now. Or if they're just very humdrum or lackluster, they don't have a lot of energy. They tend to kind of, block themselves away from social interactions. They're probably facing depression or potentially anxiety too, depending on what's happening there and kind of the high or low that they hit. So we see the signs. We actually do, but because it's not so direct as like, okay, this person's bleeding out, it's hard for us to pick up on that. And so therefore these stigmas, these insecurities just always seem to manifest. But again, that's just my point of view. But that's also based on having family who's faced mental illness. I myself who faces mental illness. I do, because I've mentioned it before, and I don't like jump in and like discuss it or anything like that per se to say, hey, look at me. But I do mention it because I think it is important for people to feel and understand that they're not the only one out there, But yeah, I have anxiety, I have PTSD and depression. It happens. And it's not like you're trying to get attention. It's not like you're trying for anything. I know most people would be like, yeah, if one day I could just get rid of this shit, that'd be great. But at the same time, it is a way of it's not supposed to be harmful, right? It's your body reacting in that fight or flight, system. And it is actually trying to protect you. It assumes there's danger, assumes that there's a situation happening, and it is actually really trying to help you out. But unfortunately, it's backfiring because you're going, well, it's not the appropriate time for this, right? It's not the, the right area to be having this type of situation. Like, what's happening? Like, no one's coming at me with a knife or anything like that. No one's pointing a gun to my head and saying, give me all your money or you're dead. Like, that situation's not happening. You could just be sitting down watching a movie and all of a sudden it hits you as if that situation was happening. But people don't understand that process either. So it is a very serious issue though. And you can go through a lot of different things. And again, I think what's bad enough is having these people with these issues, facing them, let alone also, again, bringing it back, facing these stigmas too. And then feeling like, oh, well, people don't believe me. People think I'm lying. People think, I'm just making it up. And there are some people out there, unfortunately, that do. That sucks, right? Some people do it for attention. Some people try to utilize it for whatever reasons, just because it makes them actually, ironically, feel better. But overall, though, they face a lot from this stigma too. So it's not even just like, oh, well, we can feel bad in general. Like, oh yeah, this stigma is just a stigma. It's folk psychology. It took 5 seconds for it to process, and we're just saying, oh, it's bad, rather than really taking on what is going on. But now you have to think about the people who are impacted by it and going, damn, now they've also got to face the stigma issue too. Like, that's rough. That is super, super rough.
Yeah, it's like there's already one giant mountain. Oh, good, there's 2 of them. It's actually taller than I saw from the bottom.
Right?
Super. And, we can talk a little bit about, what are the signs of a mental illness? And, trying to tell the difference between what is expected behavior versus what isn't. What might be the signs of actually a mental illness. It's not always easy, right? There is no easy test that can let somebody know if there's a mental illness in the situation, or if the actions and thoughts might be typical behaviors of a person or the result of a physical illness. If there was an easy test, I'm sure some pharmaceutical company out there would already have its hands on it, and we could all just give a drop of blood, boom, there we go. We know it, right? So there is no such test. Each illness actually has its own symptoms, and there are some common signs of mental illness in adults and adolescents that can include the following. And again, this is a list of symptoms that it's not to say that, you know, you yourself or I have never experienced some either combination of these symptoms or one of these symptoms at some point or another in our lives, or maybe during a period in our lives. But these signs are meant to be more like if you experience this on a daily level, essentially, and it's something that doesn't go away with circumstance or situation, right? As I mean, if I, you know, lost my home, lost my car, lost my job, I'm gonna be in a dark place for a bit, right? But we're talking about some of these symptoms really just existing with you on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And so some of the common signs are excessive worrying or fear, feeling excessively sad or low, confused thinking or problems concentrating and learning. And as I go through some of this list too, again, it's important to imagine that if you know somebody, or if you yourself have some of these symptoms, but if you know somebody who is exhibiting some behaviors that you're like, what is going on? These symptoms are obviously going to affect how they portray themselves and around other people, right? Like as we talked about effective communication, just because somebody maybe isn't paying attention to you, it might not have anything to do with you. It might have something to do with them, and it's possible that they might have some sort of mental health condition that prevents them from reacting or exhibiting behavior in sort of the expected manner, quote unquote, right? So confused thinking or problems concentrating and learning, extreme mood changes, including uncontrollable highs or feelings of euphoria, prolonged or strong feelings of irritability or anger, avoiding friends and social activities, difficulties understanding or relating to other people, changes in sleeping habits or feeling tired and having low energy, changes in eating habits such as increased hunger or lack of appetite, changes in sex drive, difficulty perceiving reality. We're talking like delusions or hallucinations in which a person actually experiences and senses things that don't exist in the objective reality.
And real quick too, not to interrupt you, but there is something about that too, in the sense of you may also have a shift in reality as well if you're experiencing something that's, say, like anxiety or a panic attack, where again you may be watching a movie or something, but all of a sudden your body feels like you're at gunpoint, for example. So all of a sudden you're having this kind of like reality break of like, okay, what is real? What I'm feeling and what I'm seeing are two different things. Now, of course, this is different in a way, and that's why I want to point this out. That there is a separation between this feeling and also the one that Tatiana is describing as well, just to clarify that too.
Inability to perceive changes in one's own feelings, behavior, or personality. A lack of insight, if you will. Abuse of substances like alcohol or drugs. Multiple physical ailments without obvious causes, such as headaches or stomach aches. Vague and ongoing just aches and pains, thinking about suicide, inability to carry out daily activities or handle daily problems and stress, and an intense fear of weight gain or concern with appearance. And again, this is, you know, I've experienced multiple of these types of symptoms at some period in my life or another, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for a few hours, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a few months. But it did alleviate or go away when my circumstances changed, right? So again, we're talking about these symptoms are a daily truth for somebody who has a mental health condition. And mental health conditions, of course, as we talked about, can also begin to develop in young children. And their most obvious symptoms are behavioral because they're still, learning how to identify and talk about their thoughts and emotions. And symptoms in children may include the following: changes in school performance. Again, the excessive worry or anxiety, for instance, fighting to avoid bed or school, hyperactive behavior, frequent nightmares, frequent disobedience or aggression, and frequent temper tantrums. So, what if you yourself have some of these signs? Seek professional help. If you do have a support network, also reach out to them. And getting a diagnosis is really just the first step, right? Like, you have to know your own preferences and goals, because the treatments for mental illness vary by diagnosis and they vary by person. There's no like one size fits all treatment. And there's a lot of different treatment options, and they can include medication. They can include counseling or therapy. And they can include the social support and education as well. Now, if you know somebody who has a mental health condition, or you are caring for somebody that has a mental health condition, what can you do? And you may be trying to help a family member that either doesn't have access to care or doesn't want help, which they're both difficult in and of themselves.
Right.
And I would say that the person who doesn't want help might be even harder to care for, because, as we all know, it's hard to help somebody who doesn't want to be helped. This would be an instance where I would hope that some effective communication skills might help you to communicate to them that you are worried about them and that you would like them to seek help and to take care of themselves.
Oh yeah, well, and we've got to start treating it to a point. And again, don't take me wrong here. We need to start treating it as if, like, hey, I broke my arm. Well, if you broke your damn arm, you're not going to say, no, I'm not going to go to the hospital, right? I'm not going to go and get this looked at. No, what you're going to do is say, no, I need to get this looked at, otherwise it won't heal properly, right? We need to start treating mental conditions and things like that in that way. Now, not to take it lightheartedly, because, for instance, for the most part, you're not going to lose your life, or it's not going to completely ruin your life to have a broken arm, let it heal. Mentally, though, those kind of issues can get very, very serious and life-threatening. But in the sense of just the importance of just going to see a doctor, like, we need to make it more so that way it's like, well, duh, of course I'm going to see someone. That would be silly not to. And again, a lot of it is because of the stigma. But if the stigma doesn't exist to go see a doctor because you've broken your arm, you've sprained your wrist, you have constant headaches, then, and even headaches, which are interesting, because headaches, again, are things we don't see, and that people are more than happy to tell everyone, I've got a headache today.
Take some Advil, God.
Yes, like, do something about it then, damn it. Take some Excedrin, do something. But, these people are not afraid to do that. But yet, often you talk about, like, well, maybe, if you're having stress issues, or, if you're having major anxiety, maybe you should either see a therapist or a psychologist, or, and that way they could just better look at it and go, okay, well, this is how it can help you to ease this. You don't have to face it as much, And, well, and Trunk mentions, a broken arm hurts, mental illness often does not. I have to refute that, because I honestly, as someone that goes through that, don't agree with that. Because an arm does hurt. Yes, it does. A broken arm does, but so does mental illness, actually. Especially if you're going through depression, you're hurting every single day. If you're going through anxiety, you're hurting every single day. You're feeling it constantly. There is actual pain that is involved because of how your body's working and processing. So that does actually exist. So the thing is that with a broken arm, you can tune it out. With how you feel internally, it's tough. Even though people say, oh, I could tune it out, or I'm numb to it, or whatever, it's still there. You just find new ways of dealing with it. Even if they're not healthy, you find new ways of dealing with it, right? And so, again, I get where you're going with that, but I do wholeheartedly have to disagree, unfortunately, with you on that. That it does hurt. You do feel it, and that it affects your whole body. Whereas with a broken arm, that's just affecting that arm. But a mental condition can impact the entirety of the body. Like, for instance, I could still get out of bed if I have a broken arm. Not easily sometimes, but I can still get out of bed. But if I'm depressed, if I'm in a point where I can't feel like I can move and that I don't have the energy and I'm feeling horrible and that the world is closing in around me, I'm not able to get out of bed. So it's like, it's just how you look at it. It's the perspective. And again, I think it's also looking at that, well, what we see outside in comparison to what's actually inside. There is that debate too. Again, what we see, and we can go, oh, well, this is how this works. And, well, I understand a broken arm in comparison to understanding an actual psychological condition. And again, we need to start treating them as one and the same in a way, or if not more seriously.
Yeah, well, the mind does control a lot that's happening in the body. And conversely, the body does have an effect on the mind as well. I think we talk about them as if they're two separate entities, but at the end of the day, there's a symbiotic relationship. You can't have one without the other, kind of a thing. But what's going on in your head, especially in some mental health conditions, literally has a physical impact on your body. If you are undergoing a panic attack, for example, as Evan mentioned, your eyes get big, your heart rate speeds up, you can get dizzy. Like, there's a lot of things that a mental health condition can physically manifest in your body, such as pain. And of course, everybody is different, and it's hard to certainly come up with a blanket statement of this or that, but your mind does affect what your body does, which in turn affects how your mind reacts, and so on and so forth. Like, it's a very intricate and complicated system, and that's why physical health and mental health really are very interconnected.
Oh yeah, well, and we've kind of mentioned this before when we talk on like health segments and everything. That's amazing in what one part of the body can do to the rest of your body. As an example, and again, I know this kind of deviates a little bit, but we've talked about this too, because we go see a chiropractor every once in a while when we can, or what have you. And it's amazing how you can have something happen in your upper back that impacts pain in your feet or in your legs, because of how you sit, because of just how the muscles have adjusted to try to correct itself from poor posture or movement or a past injury or what have you. And, it's amazing too what the brain can actually do to the body as well. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, bring out some sort of manifestation of pain or inability to move in some certain way. There is that as well. And that is actually being studied even more so too, because first, the scientific community and everyone else had to come to terms with the fact that, okay, yes, these issues are real. They do exist. So we had to get over that hump first, right? And then they had to get over the hump of, okay, well, they do exist, and now here are some ways to help against it. But now they're going, okay, well, what is the long-term impact from these onto the body, and how does it impact how we move in our everyday life? Not just how we perceive things, how we visualize things and thus process and think about them, but how it does actually impact us physically. And so there's still a lot of research being done on that too. So there's still much more to learn on it. I don't want to sound like, oh yes, for sure, this will always happen. And as Tatiana said, it depends on the person, depends on the condition, depends on the severity of said condition as well.
And it's just like, to use the analogy of the broken arm, some people may have broken their arm before, and so another broken arm is no big deal.
I mean, I've dislocated my arm and leg so many times. Like, I've done it multiple times to the point where I hate the pain. Is one of the worst pains I've had. But yeah, you're just like, okay, I did it again, damn it.
But then somebody else might have a broken arm, whether or not for the first time or not, but they might experience it very differently than the other person. And mental health is certainly similar in that sense, where everybody experiences everything differently also, even if it's the same mental health illness. Mm-hmm. The same way that we look at colors, and I say that it's red, and you're like, it's more pink. And we're looking at the same objective thing. So certainly mental illness can also be experienced differently as well, which makes it even more hard to find effective treatments. What worked for one person may not work for this person, and so on and so forth. So it's very important that if you are seeking treatment options, don't rule any of them out, but also don't depend on just one. Just because it's potentially working a little bit, it might actually impact you negatively in some other way as well. For example, if you're taking medication that may have other symptoms or may worsen some of your symptoms while mitigating others as well. So that's really important, certainly if you're the person going through it, but also if you are caring for somebody, it's also important to recognize that as well.
Yeah, and actually Trunk in chat too makes a great point based on a lot of what you've been saying too, which is, mental illness, the cure depends on the person, the situation, what they're going through, what they're willing to accept. Whereas a broken arm has kind of a cookbook treatment to a point, right? Like, okay, you've broken it this way, so we could put it in a cast, we could put it in a sling. Maybe it's a hairline fracture in comparison to a complete break, or maybe it's a sublocation in comparison to an actual dislocation, or, what have you. And so there are specific ways of handling things, whereas, with mental health, there is a fine line, and sometimes you have to do multiple processes at once. Sometimes a therapist or a psychologist will say, okay, you need to be put on medication, but we're going to put you on this type of medication over this. And then from there, we're also going to make sure that, we look at how you take care of yourself on an everyday basis, or how you focus in on the world around you. So, there's like behavioral therapy techniques you can utilize. Then they'll also say, but we also want you to put you on some medication, but we could also try this or that. So sometimes you kind of have to cross, I guess, how do I want to say, like cross segment different aspects of different treatments to really make a perfect, at least not a perfect treatment, but a treatment that works best for you in your life.
It's like making a meal. Like somebody could like chicken and someone else could like chicken, but somebody likes chicken extra spicy with some potatoes, and some might like chicken sort of more mild, maybe a little fried, and stuff like that. And so you're still eating chicken, and you're both eating a chicken meal, but it's very different in how those get sampled, as it were. So really, our best advice to someone who is going through a mental health condition is seek professional help. Do reach out to your support network if you have one, and realize that the treatments do vary, and that you have options, and it's important to talk about it. In terms of somebody who is caring for a person that has a mental health conditions, there's a little bit more of a cookbook advice approach, if you will. And the first really is, don't buy into the stigma. Be clear with yourself about who the person you care about really is. Learn to separate the illness from the person. Because even if we're very close to someone with mental illness and we advocate for his or her rights, we also may have our own preconceptions and false beliefs about mental illness. So just be sure that you are separating the illness from the person that you care about. And, understand that confusing behavior may be due to the symptoms of that person's mental health conditions. We tend to assume that behavior is conscious and deliberate, as we had talked about earlier when we were talking about effective communication. We think that maybe that person is doing that behavior to get back at us, and they're trying to hurt us. And it might not be. Many of the symptoms of mental illness actually express themselves through social behavior. So it can be natural to feel hurt by those symptoms. And again, it's important to realize that it might be due to the symptoms and not the fact that that person is deliberately acting in a particular way. Another important thing is that you should get support from other people. You have to take care of yourself as well. Because once you strengthen your connections with, other it can take some of the pressure off from you. You may resent the person that you're caring for a little less because you have the support that you need as well. It doesn't feel like it's all on you, especially if you're caring for somebody who has a chronic illness, a very severe mental illness as well. And, you're, as with any illness, right, there's periods where it's worse and there's periods where it's a little better as well. So your loved one will also have periods where they're learning to cope with their challenges as well, with their illness challenges, and may not have the time to, give their energy and attention to you as well. So it's very important that you have your own support network and that you take care of yourself too, so that you can take care of them. As Evin mentioned before, put the mask on yourself before you help somebody else. Learn to communicate effectively. Which ties in again with what we talked before. Obviously, good communication skills are going to improve all of your relationships, but they are especially important if you are speaking with somebody who has a mental illness. You can make choices that improve your chances of getting the results that you want when you speak to someone. And as hard as it may seem as well, try to see it from their perspective, right? Because of their symptoms, somebody that you're caring for that has a mental health condition may actually perceive things differently than you would even think. They may be feeling like strong emotions like fear. They could have low self-esteem. They could be experiencing a delusion or a hallucination. And all of this may actually be going on even if they don't express it, even if they can't put words to it. This can still happen, right? So put yourself in their shoes. Try to think about how they're feeling, rather than only about what they're saying or what their behavior is exhibiting. And try to adjust your communication style with their possible experience in mind, right? Because that'll make them more likely to really hear and understand you. And it's not easy. Especially if you haven't experienced that mental health condition, right? You may not know what they're actually experiencing. So you can ask them, you can have a conversation with them and ask them to explain as best as they can, and if they can, how they're feeling, what they're experiencing. Also, do your research. We do live in an age where at the very least there is information out there that you can research and make yourself and educate yourself on. And then the last piece, which is again similar to what we talked about with effective communication, focus on the larger goals. When you are upset or you are dealing with somebody who maybe has a mental health condition, remind yourself what your true long-term goal is, right? It may be to live peacefully with that person. It may be to encourage your child to eat more healthily. But your true goal is probably not to win the argument or feel like you're right, or to remind them of like how much you put up for their sake, because it's easy to get defensive and it's easy to get into that mode. So again, focus on your larger goals and realize that the person that you're caring for is a person who is going through something that maybe you don't fully understand, but that if you are there to help them, you are there to help them. Exactly.
I think in having that support, again, sometimes it's hard for people to admit that they need the support. They don't realize it, that's a part of it. There's many facets on obstacles even in that situation of someone being willing to accept assistance, but just being there for them and being willing to show that you are there for them can be really huge too. Even if they may never take you up on just talking about things right away, just having them understand that they're not alone can be very beneficial, absolutely beneficial, especially when they're constantly feeling that way. It's an everyday occurrence. They're always feeling in a certain way. It's good just to let them know that someone may not completely understand it, but at least understands enough where they can be there when something is needed. You know what I mean? Like just having that reassurance that, again, if the walls feel like they're closing in, they're not, and that there is someone there that you can talk with when it feels like that is happening. Because I think that's one of the biggest concerns too, is not just the situation of the response, or what I want to say. It's not the what you feel from the mental illnesses a lot of times, as it is just feeling like you're taking them on by yourself and feeling exhausted from them and feeling like you're constantly getting beat up from the inside out. That I think really is a thing that hits people harder than anything else a lot of times. Not all the time, but a lot of the times, if they do realize what's happening, depending again on the mental condition.
Right. And, when we talk about separating the illness from the person, we're saying that you have to be clear with yourself about who the person that you care about really is. And just like if somebody has a headache, right, and they're kind of grumpy, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily a grumpy person. It means that right now they have a headache. And you can choose to take a treatment for it, right? Let's say an Advil or an Excedrin. And if that takes care of the headache and they're still grumpy, then maybe they weren't grumpy because of the headache. Maybe they're a grumpy person in general. But if that does take care of the grumpiness, then that's when you can realize, okay, it's the headache that maybe brought that on, right? And again, we're looking at patterns and trends. It's just important that if, let's say I'm thinking of a family that maybe has a child and that child develops a mental health condition when they're age 14. It's important for the parents to not say, oh, my child has XYZ condition. I looked it up and it says XYZ condition is this, so my child is now this. Right? We want to stress that you want to look at that child as the person that they are, and that X, Y, and Z may affect them differently even, and treatments for that X, Y, and Z may affect them differently than anybody else. And so it's important to not just look at that child as, oh, well, they have this, and so I have labeled them, they're in this bucket, that's it, the end of it.
Well, and I think the big point of it is to say is that depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, anything like that, that is not who you are. It is a part of what makes you who you are. And we got to be careful on how we use language. We can't say something is something, because I have depression, I have anxiety. That doesn't mean that I am depression, I am anxiety. That doesn't mean that when you look in the Webster's dictionary, for example, my face comes up. And if it does, heaven help you, I'm sorry. This is not going to really help you much. But, that's not what we're saying. What we're trying to say is that it is a part of them, but there are many parts to a person. And so it's looking at the other parts too and understanding why you care for this person, whether it's in a family relationship or a romantic relationship or what have you, understanding that that is a part of them and that's not going to go anywhere. And that there are some days where that part might be more dominant than other parts of that person. And there's going to be times where the other parts that you fell in love with or really care about become more dominant than that. And that's just kind of the cycle that you have to understand exists. But that doesn't mean that they are what they are, but that is just a part of them is really what we're trying to get across at the end here with this latest bit of discussion.
Yes. And Chunk has a good point as well. If you are caring for someone, it can also be enough to just be there, not even saying or doing anything, but being there and being approachable. Sometimes all you can do is what you can do, right? And so if you yourself don't have it's like if I see, I don't know, this is going to be a terrible analogy, and I apologize in advance, but if you see a house that's burning and it's on fire, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to go in there and try to rescue everybody in there. If you, don't know, don't feel comfortable doing that, don't know how to do that, are afraid, don't want to, but you can do other things. You can call for help. You can tell somebody else, like raise the alarm. So there are other ways that you can help in any situation in life in general, to do what feels comfortable and natural for you. You shouldn't have to force doing something because you think that's what you need to do or that's what you've been told to do or anything like that. I think at the end of the day, I would imagine, as long as you are open and honest with your intentions, the person that you care for will appreciate that.
Absolutely. So in the end here, again, just, get rid of the stigma. I think just to kind of summarize as we're getting toward the end of the show here, but, get rid of the stigma. Try to actually take time to understand it rather than just assuming and letting folk psychology take over. Remembering that we're dealing with real people here who are going through something very real. And at least being willing to listen. Even if we don't understand, and this can go for the communication aspect of today's show too, is just being willing to listen. Even if there is a disagreement, even if you're saying, I don't agree with what you're saying, is just being willing to listen and actually take it in. Because you'd be surprised at what having an open ear can teach you, at what new things you can discover about the world around you by just, again, having that open ear to the environment that is around you. So, but with that, thank you everyone today for joining us, for having an awesome discussion. Even if some of the discussion in chat kind of derailed to very random weird things, but that's okay. Because it was all language based mostly and people's typos. So we can at least appreciate that based on the first segment being about communication. But we thank you very much. If you actually enjoyed the communication aspect as well, I did mention this earlier in chat, but I'll mention this via voice as well, via spoken communication. We actually did touch base a lot on emojis and how they communicate, and just visual communication over time, going from pictographs on up to the emoji and everything. And so we do discuss that more in a previous episode. If you want, go ahead and check out our Podbean, and there'll be more information there. Or again, look at our earlier episodes on iTunes or whatever aggregator you use. I'll put it up in chat, but it is mindmine.podbean.com. That's going to be where you're going to find all of our past episodes, as well as potential news of future episodes coming up. And if you're on Twitch, of course, make sure to give us a follow, as you will be able to be notified first and foremost when we go live, or we have any changes or any updates about the streams that we do here at MindMineTV. Also, another quick note is that we will be gaming again today, because we do game streams as well. So, a lot of times we do hashtag Serious Talk Saturday, and on the other hand, we do, hashtag pew pew pew. So we do like our gaming as well. So we'll be back at 5 p.m. PDT today to take on more God of War. And then, of course, tomorrow as well, Sunday, we'll be taking on even more God of War. So make sure to join us. Again, if you haven't followed already, make sure to follow. Check us out. And if you're listening to us via an aggregator for a podcast, make sure to give us a follow or subscribe on that platform as well, because it just helps, again, having more people come across us in the search results. So if you love what you hear and you really want to support in some way, make sure just to follow, subscribe, rate, leave a comment on what you like or appreciate about the podcast. And that can go a really long way. So we thank you so much. We thank you to the live audience here hanging out with us in chat, just, talking away, having a good time. We really do appreciate every single one of you, honestly. I keep saying it, but it's because it's true, damn it. So take it, run with it.
Take the love. Take it.
That's right. We'll take all of it. Other than that, thank you so very much, everyone, and have an awesome rest of your week if we don't see you later today or on Sunday. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.